Well, first thing I wanted to do is congratulate you for winning last year's election. I know it was quite some time ago, but I did want to ask you, when did you first know that you had won the Ward One council person race last November?
So the honest answer, so there are two answers. Officially, when the Orange County Registrar's Office, counting ballots. Unofficially, we were pretty confident that I had won the night of the election. I was pretty far ahead of the next closest person, and I think it was like 15 points ahead. So we were pretty sure, just based on the data that we had, that there weren't going to be enough kind of close that gap. And then the next day it did go down. Eventually it went down to about 11%, but not very much.
Mhm.
So we were pretty confident, but wanted to wait until it was official to
Okay,
say anything.
awesome. Well, backtracking a little bit, what made you first want to run for city council person when that opportunity came?
So I wanted to run. It's kind of weird because, let me just kind of backtrack on that, which is most of my life was not involved in politics.
Mhm.
Like, I am so impressed by, the young people in our city and students who are involved, because for most of my life, we never taught politics at home. I'm a first generation refugee, and we grew up very poor. So my mom has a third grade education from Vietnam. So politics is just isn't something we discussed. Um, and it wasn't until like law school really that I got more involved. I mean, I was voted because you kind of told you're supposed to vote. But it was really when I went into law degree program as well as my Master of Public Policy program, where I realized that like the value of local government.
Mhm.
And it's like, it's not sexy, it's not cool, it's not dramatic like Congress, though it can be. Um, so so but when you really think about it, where you live, where you go to school, where you work, where are there parks, is it safe for you to walk down the street, is someone picking up your trash? All of these things are dealt with at the city council level,
Mhm.
not the state or federal level.
Mhm.
And so I was working, I am still working at the same law firm. And during this time was when I heard that there was going to be a, what do you call it, like a redistricting, like that the city of Santa Ana had been for violating the California Voting Rights Act for discriminating against its Asian residents.
Mm.
And that's when the districting happened. I had a 5-year plan. Like, I was like, I'm work being an attorney, like it's hard, man, like to figure out being the first in your family to graduate high school, college, law school, and then get into white collar. um, but then when this happened, one of my really good friends, Mayor Pro Tem of Garden Grove, Kimberly Swin, she's like, no, you're running now. And
Mhm.
because she kind of like pushed me before I thought I was ready, but she knew I was going to be ready. So I was prepared when the time actually came to run. I had announced January 2020 during the Women's March. And I
Mhm.
was like, I'm going to run in Ward 1, this and that. And then the recall was certified. Like, you'd
Mm.
heard about it, but no one was sure. No one's ever sure that a recall or a referendum or anything would qualify. But once it qualified, it was like, well, I guess I can just sit out, or because one, the old Ward 6 was encompasses where I live and most of Ward 1,
Mhm.
um, and because I think that member what is just truly, she stands for everything I'm against.
Mm.
And so I was like, let's do it. Let's run, take that opportunity and run. Um, of course, I decided to run, and about a week later, COVID hit. So
Mhm.
it was a really crazy, path to get to running for office and choosing to be on this journey. But yeah, it got me here where I am today. So I'm very excited.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned earlier too that you're the first to do a lot in your family, right? First to go to school, first to kind of get into that white collar job. How did, well, I guess what the question I want to ask you is like, where did that motivation come from? Where did that inspiration come from as a kid to want to pursue those things?
Hmm. Well, so my mom always said stay in school.
Mhm.
Not that she ever really understood what school would be like, here in the United States, obviously. But it was really my friends. I just had friends who did well in school because they cousins and uncles and parents who did well and were, pharmacists and stuff like that. And because, well, my friends like school and I like my friends, I just did what they did, right? Like you kind of birds of a feather. And of course, I'm very lucky to have had friends who were kind of on the straight and narrow for the most part. But it was also like learning.
Hmm.
Like it's very difficult, I think, as a first generation immigrant, someone growing in a household where, we at home, we watched Chinese soap operas that were dubbed in Vietnamese. Like it wasn't even really Vietnamese movies, it was like Chinese movies in Vietnamese. And it was, listening to Vietnamese music. And so like the only way I really, got to know quote American culture was at school. And everything was so different from how it was at home. And so that was just really interesting to me. I just like learning. And so that kept me going. But for most of my like elementary, middle school career, I guess I wasn't ESL, so English second language, but I was kind of in the slow class
Mm.
because when they test you into kindergarten, I answered in Vietnamese. And so I kept answering Vietnamese. I took, kind of slower classes. And it wasn't until middle school where I tested really well on a standardized test. The teacher's like, you should be in an honors class. I'm like, all right, cool. It didn't make a difference to me. Like I didn't know any better. And that, that one moment, in my opinion, really set the trajectory for the rest of my educational life, right? Because every step you have, it gets you to the next level, the next honors, the next AP course, the next college, the
Hmm.
next law school, the next career. And so, it just took one person. But otherwise, it was mostly because I did it.
But that's good to hear because I know, I'm also a first generation Mexican American. And so I have a similar experience in the sense that my parents didn't have that college background. They weren't familiar with a lot of the process, but they always pushed school on me. There was always school, 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 stay in school. But I think a lot of times, whether it was my peers or people who had similar backgrounds to me, they got into the wrong friend group and then they went down a wrong path. So I think that's cool though that you're able to kind of like distinguish and find a good friend group to kind of help motivate you and to continue on to do what you're doing now in your career.
Yeah, I mean, there's a core group of friends. It's
Mhm.
me and my sister and two other women that we grew up with and known since I was 7.
Mhm.
In fact, one used to live with us. And we always talk about how unusual it is that we are where we are. And reflecting on that, because I'm an attorney, and I have a master's degree. My sister is an optometrist. She just graduated from optometry last year. One of my friends is who graduated from Cal State Fullerton, and the
Mhm.
other just graduated from pharmacy school this past May. And we all kind of talk about how, we knew people who did drugs. We knew people who sold drugs. We knew people in gangs. We knew people who were, in quote bars or running bars. And that could have been a life that we fell into had we not, in my opinion, been lucky,
Mhm.
because there were people watching out for us. There were teachers who cared what we were doing, and we had each other. Not all the time, but we did, and I think that really helped us go forward. Um, and then here we are.
Mhm.
So just trying to pay it back and really ways to like, how do I use this experience, how do I use this education, how do I use this personal history to give back. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And it's been a crazy so far.
Mhm. Okay. Well, to backtrack a little bit too, you grew up in this section or the area that you now represent in the west side of Santa Ana in the Ward 1 now. But what do you remember most from your childhood? What are some things that stood out to you about that part of Santa Ana?
So first, that it never felt like Santa Ana.
Hmm.
Like a lot of people who grew up on the west side, we went to Garden Grove Unified School District schools,
Mhm.
not Santa Ana. Most of the people who live on the west side are Asian, not Latino. And we just, I think, kind of always felt like we were more Westminster, Garden Grove, Fountain Valley, especially being Vietnamese American. And so some of the most distinct things were really kind of how free it was when we were a kid. Maybe it's just that's how I was raised. But you know, kids playing outside in front yards or shared green spaces in townhomes or fourplexes. And I actually visited last year. We were shooting one of the videos to kind of talk about my upbringing, and their fences up now.
Hmm.
They're like iron fences up and all blocked off, and it's just such a different place
Hmm.
in some of the old neighborhoods that I grew up in. Some of the other things I really are the number of like Buddhist temples,
Yeah.
because I was raised Buddhist. I went to Buddhist Sunday school. That's where I learned how to read and write Vietnamese and spoke Vietnamese at home.
Hmm.
And there's just so many. I would bet money if I were a gambler, bet money that Ward 1 in Santa Ana has the most, like the highest concentration of Vietnamese Buddhist temples in America. Like
Hmm.
everywhere, every corner is like a Buddhist temple of some sort.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, those are just some of my memories. I remember walking down Harbor and visiting one of my friends, but I also remember getting honked at by passing cars, getting catcalls, and I'm like 11.
Oh my God.
Well, it's yeah, one, that speaks kind of a lot of the patriarchal norms and sexism, but it also speaks to the fact that Harbor Boulevard is well known and
Hmm.
notorious for being a magnet for vice activity, prostitution, and things like that. And those are just things that stick out in my mind. And I went off to college for 10 years. I went to UCLA undergrad, was off for a year and a half, then went to USC. And just whenever I'd come back, it was just, the stores were closing down. There's no activity, especially in 2009, 2010.
Hmm.
And so those are kind of the things that stick out in my mind when I think about how my childhood has, and growing up in Santa Ana, going away and coming back, it's changed. I'm really hopeful that, being on this dais, I can help advocate to bring that part of Santa Ana back into the city.
Hmm.
The Vietnamese American population, but also obviously just our Latino population, all the residents who live on that side who don't feel like a part of this community.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's something I didn't appreciate and maybe understand till I was a little older, because I grew up right there off of Fairview and Warner. So I believe that's considered District 2 now with the re-election or the redistributing. But I do remember, as soon as you go a little bit further down Warner, it is Fountain Valley. But if you go up certain streets like Euclid or New Hope even, or Harbor, like you said, there's a lot of temples. I believe I spent a lot of time at Rosita Park, and across the street from Rosita Park is a temple that looks, I remember as a kid, I was like, whoa, like, am I in a different country? Like, what is this? And
Yeah.
it felt like that. And, but it's something that I think, like you said, kind of gets forgotten about a little bit, because Santa Ana is predominantly Mexican. It's predominantly a lot of, Mexican American restaurants or, street vendors and stuff like that on the other side. But like you said, there's a big chunk of that. And like you said, it kind of gets sometimes pushed with Garden Grove or pushed with Westminster, because
Mhm.
further down the street, then you do see more of that. But I think it's cool that, you not only grew up in that area, but you're representing a large portion of the demographic that lives in that ward.
Yeah, and that was by design, right? That was because residents suit the city. And it's just really crazy because when we think about something like violating the Voting Rights Act or the California Voting Rights Act, we think it's like a very white city and it's like Black residents who don't get to vote,
Mhm.
right? That's kind of the image that we have in our mind. I can understand that because that's where the Voting Rights Act where the civil rights movement grew out of. But in a city that's minority majority, like 10% or less actually of Caucasians, non-Hispanic Caucasians, and 80% Latino. And previously, before Phil Becerra was elected, we had like 12 years of only Latinos on the council.
Mm.
And so it's just kind of like turned on its head, but Santa Ana is kind of always turned on its head. And I'm very proud and honored and excited to be the first Asian woman and the first Vietnamese American on the dais, because I get emails and calls all the time from folks, not just in my ward, but if they're Vietnamese, they're probably going to call me if there's an issue, or email me because they don't have anyone else that they can reach out to or talk to,
Hmm.
and be like, oh, I'm trying to get this boba shop open, but there's this issue. It wasn't even in our domain, but I'm going to help because he's a Santa Ana resident and a
Hmm.
business owner. And that kind of leads me to my next thing, which is I'm so excited because last night we finally voted our first vote on the budget,
Hmm.
which is always crazy. It was like the third night regarding the budget. It's the third like 6+ hour meeting. And one of the line items that we added that we've never had before is to budget for a Vietnamese community liaison. And it's something that I've been talking about since I started my campaign and even before. And the position, it sounds weird, right? Like, what is that? Well, the point is to have somebody at City Hall who is capable of translating documents, talking to folks on the phone, but also doing community outreach. Like if, let's say, I don't run for reelection or I die and no other Vietnamese will run for office in Santa Ana, having someone who's a full-time staffer means that there's still going to be someone that residents can feel they can go to.
Hmm.
So still do the work of going to work with nonprofits and temples and churches and community groups. And you don't have to rely on, hopefully there's a decent Vietnamese candidate,
Hmm.
or somebody else might take it up, right? And that's, I think, really what we're supposed to be doing to institutionalize like equity. And when we're talking diversity and inclusion, it can't just be because you have a face of someone who's representative of that group, but to really do the work of ensuring that they're engaged and involved. So I'm very excited. We just got through the first hump. We have to vote again on the 15th. And then after that, staff has to go make the classification. Then we have to recruit. It's a long road, but I'm very excited because we have them in other cities and
Hmm.
schools have them.
Okay, yeah. And I think, like you said, with the schools, I think it ultimately provides comfortability. I think that's one thing I always recall back to my childhood. I didn't have a lot of Latino teachers growing up, or
Mm-hmm.
councils or principals. So, you're growing up in these Latino dominant communities and neighborhoods, but then you go to the schools and it's a lot of like other ethnicity teachers, which is fine, but sometimes you don't get that like personal one-on-one experience. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's huge, that like whether it's for the Vietnamese culture or the whatever population is there, that we have equal representation, and so just so they feel comfortable living here, because I think that's a huge thing too, to add to, I guess you could say, the what do you call that, the level of happiness, I guess, in the city, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, like the quality of life.
Quality of life, there you go.
Yeah, and it's just so crazy because like if we watch in a council meeting or whatever, you never hear a Vietnamese person call. It's very rare, super rare. I'm like, well, do Vietnamese people not care about housing affordability or safety or, where the monies are going, our parks? No, they're all going to Westminster and Garden Grove and Fountain Valley and, complaining to those councils, even if they don't live there, because they feel that's their community, that they're welcome to speak up and have a voice. And I think here, even in San, like during COVID, because we have the call-in function now, I mean, I've seen so much more engagement, and it's really exciting to hear folks talk the issues and to show up and to really make their voices heard. So that's really what I'm trying to do, small step, with the Vietnamese community here in Santa Ana.
Mhm. Now, speaking on the Vietnamese community here and just Orange County as a whole, because I've gotten the chance to work in Garden Grove, I did have the luxury of having Fat Bowie, who's running for
Mm.
Garden Grove mayor, on last November as well. But talk to me a little bit about some of the things that may be misunderstood about the Vietnamese American experience, whether it's from your family and the refugee background, or some of the stuff that goes on here in the States.
Yeah, so Vietnamese residents, voters or not, but just residents, tend to lean conservative. Of all Asian Americans in general, lean liberal, but Vietnamese Americans tend the other direction. They tend to be more Republican, and they tend to be conservative. And a huge reason for that is because many of us came here in the 80s during the Reagan era.
Mm.
And the GOP has done a very good job of recruiting, training, and elevating Vietnamese American candidates. There's a bench of um, of candidates, of qualified, well, whatever you can qualified, but a bench of people interested and able to run for office and to do that job. I'm a Democrat. It's no secret. I'm a Vietnamese Democrat, and I'm a Democrat because I believe in universal health care and Section 8 housing and affordable housing and a living wage, welfare for medical and housing, all of the things that keep people afloat because I benefited from them.
Hmm.
I was on Section 8. I had medical, it's called Medi-Cal, so Medicaid, and I had food stamps.
Hmm.
And without all of those investments for all 25 years of my life, until I basically graduated college, I wouldn't have become a lawyer and pay a ton of money in taxes and give back, right? But now I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. And so I feel very strongly that that's what the Democratic Party stands for, or at least we're trying. Vietnamese Americans love all of those things.
Hmm.
We love Section 8 and food stamps and medical care and all that stuff. You can look up the data. The main reason why they tend to be Republican is because Republicans are seen as more anti-communist and
Hmm.
more anti-China. And this goes back to the history of the Vietnam War and the diaspora and the Vietnamese community, and the sole reason why there is a Vietnamese American community here. And it's because those who represented or who fought for South Vietnam were forced to flee, or after the communist takeover, a lot of, like my parents and myself in my mom's belly,
Hmm.
left for a better life. And so for many folks who are older, who tend to be very politically involved, they feel that loss, right? They feel like they were forced out of their homes, their homeland, their country, away from their families, being separated for decades, potentially believing they were never going to see them again. Um, and they want that back, and they feel the Republican Party is the one that is really more anti-communist. There's a growing divide between the older generation and the younger generation,
Hmm.
because Fall of Saigon happened 46 years ago.
Hmm.
That's a long time. That's two, maybe even three generations if you're being really generous. So two
Hmm.
generations, and people forget. And I'm not trying to belittle, the Fall of Saigon. It's something I care deeply, because when my mom was trekking through that jungle with my dad, 9 months pregnant, to go to Thailand and gave birth to me 3 weeks, she believed she was never going to see her brothers and sisters again. To go to a country she had never been to and doesn't speak the language and doesn't know anybody, in the hopes that some unborn child might have a better life,
Hmm.
but no guarantees. And so, with that, it's just, there's all these feelings just tied up into it. But I think for those of us who are younger, we are trying very hard to kind of um, make that sacrifice worth it by fighting for rights here in the country that we live now.
Hmm.
And I think that that's something I think a lot of immigrant children feel. Like, we always want to make our parents' sacrifices and hard work worth it. And and I think I see so many more young Asian Americans and Vietnamese Americans trying to get involved, trying to get more folks involved and engaged. But it's hard because we also still have this whole mentality here, Vietnamese Americans, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans in general, of, the stereotype, work hard, then you'll do well.
Hmm.
But that's a complete lie. That's
Yeah.
bullshit. Working hard doesn't get you where you need to be. It might help you, but it's about opportunity. It's
Hmm.
about second and fourth chances. And it's about somebody saying, I'm going to take a risk on you, right? And I'm going to trust you. And so when you put aside this, like, hard work and just be quiet, don't make a fuss, and you'll do okay, maybe in some circumstances they will do okay, but you're never going to get to a place where it's safe, where that you are included or you're a part of this community. And we see that every generation. So, in the 80s, we had the murder of Chin, where he was Chinese American and he was murdered by two white guys because they thought he was Japanese.
Mm.
Before that, you had Japanese internment of American internment of Japanese American citizens,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to take their life and property and everything and to round them up and put them away because they look different from the typical quote American. And more recently, right, we have Kung flu and China virus and anti-Asian hate just resurfacing all of these tensions that have existed forever. And putting your head down and working hard is not going to get rid of that. And we, aren't immune here in Santa Ana. I tell people my senior year in high school, we almost had prom canceled at Los Amigos because someone spray painted chink on all of our lockers.
Wow.
And this was in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, during my election, there were independent expenditures like political activities like PACs who spent money to do flyers or mailers in Vietnamese saying that I was basically a communist.
Wow.
Because they know how that makes people feel.
Mm-hmm.
And there were articles and Facebook posts that I saw that was like, well, are we going to have too many Asians? Can't let the Asians take over. Like these things, they're not just out there in the world, but they're here in our own city. So really, doing this work when we're talking about Vietnamese community, who are Vietnamese voters, we have to understand the history of why that is, and then also understand that it's kind of our job to fully realize that and then still with them, because there are more Vietnamese American voters or Vietnamese voters here who are starting to lean a little bit, like we want universal care. Like we want to be able to retire with dignity, and we want to have jobs that pay better than $10 an hour for backbreaking work. So that's a lot of the Vietnamese community, and as I tell you, it's not that different from the Latino community,
right?
And definitely not very from the Cubans and Venezuelans. We have a very similar story and trajectory, but I think the hard part when we're talking about, well, what is our history and what is our political power and how do we make this place better for us? It's also really difficult because Vietnamese Americans are much poorer. Chinese Americans and Korean Americans and Japanese Americans, Indian Americans, but we also all speak different languages. Like, of course, there's no quote Latino vote because we have lots of different countries and whatnot. But you can communicate with each other. You can talk to each other. Unless you're bilingual, a typical Vietnamese person is not going to be able to talk to a typical Japanese person if they don't speak English. Just totally different languages. And so you also have a lot of dilution of power when you can't work together. And there's, again, history. Chinese and Vietnamese history in the homeland is very complicated, and then some of that gets brought here. So that's kind of understanding the and kind of what we have to look at and work on so we can move forward from that.
Okay. I kind of wanted to follow up too with, you mentioned the Asian hate that we've seen, especially since the coronavirus broke out here in the United States and has been on all the media outlets. I know you're a big advocate for stopping Asian hate, but what are ways that the common everyday citizen can combat these things, whether it is Asian hate or just hate against any other races, religion, or people with different skin color?
I would say the first thing is to educate yourself. First thing, go read, go Google, go, check out these posts and podcasts and videos, even on YouTube. Like, don't believe everything you read, but go do that work, because it's fucking exhausting to explain to somebody, what Vietnam War is or why Vietnamese people in America hate communism, or it's just tiring, right? Trying to explain yourself all the time. So being an ally and trying to fight that is to educate yourself and doing the work yourself and not relying on the community that is actually being harmed to for you. The second, and that applies to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and any community that is being harmed. The second thing is calling out the people you're closest to when they something stupid or wrong or racist or anything. Um, that includes your parents, that includes your best friend. If, I see the other day, someone joked and no malicious intent. And he's like, oh man, you got gypped. Well, you know what? Gypped is a derogatory term for Romani people in Europe.
Oh
They're
wow.
nomadic and they have been prosecuted for hundreds of years, including not persecuted, excuse me, by the Nazis
Wow.
and, killed like the Jews were. And so we're not understanding, we're not learning, we're not being, educating ourselves on what these things mean. And that it means also, frankly, let me use Spanish because, in Santa Ana, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get called chinita all the time. But because in Spanish, you just kind of say, oh, it's chinita, but I'm not Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that for some, it's just a general Asian, but it's not. There is a term for Asian. There's a term for Vietnamese. It's Vietnamita. I looked it up. And it's the same thing for Vietnamese people. We every Latino person May, which means Mexican, because don't call us South Viet Mexican. I don't need to get into that fight. And using your language purposefully and correctly and with, I think, empathy is really important, because the things we say hurt, right? The things that we joke about hurt, and it may not hurt you
Mm-hmm.
or the next person, but it's hurting the person who's probably too afraid to say anything about it. And that's really where we have to be really careful. And right, saying China virus, I'm not Chinese. I can just
Yeah.
say it's not me. But to a typical, abuelita, it's like, well, chinitas, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the same with a lot of communities, or to a white person from Idaho who's like, well, you all look Oriental to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's really crucial, I think, in doing the work. I would say the last thing is working in solidarity with each other and not just working with the ethnic group or the in group or whoever it is you're most comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
I really think it's about, having these conversations, and saying, well, where am I, failing, or where can I do better? And same with you. And how do we create events or create spaces or post and share and uplift each other? I think all of those three things are just crucial, and they're just the first step,
Yeah.
really, to this whole conversation. But if you can't do the work, if you're not able to speak up on behalf of others and you're not willing to work with the other person, there's really nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say is truly important, because nothing happens in a silo, right? Today it's, me being called kung flu or a sexual object, where that, guy in Atlanta went and murdered 8 people, 6 of them Asian American women, because he had
Mm-hmm.
a quote sex addiction
Right.
and he had to destroy his temptations. The sexualization of Asian women didn't come out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And tomorrow it could be, so that kids who are not being separated at the border, right? Because I'm Vietnamese, I'm not going to get separated at the border. So, but fighting in these spaces together is going to help us uplift all of our communities. And that's what I would recommend.
Mm-hmm. And that's one thing to kind of tie a bow on it, is that, these things, like you said, this just didn't happen overnight. Like you said, there's been a lot of, whether it's been influences by media, by different TV shows, and not just something within the past 20 years, but stuff that was long, long time ago. There's a lot of stuff that were anti this, anti that. And so I think a lot of these people's, when they do make these racist remarks based off of skin color, religion, or whatever it may be, it's because it's kind of taught down. And I think
Mm-hmm.
COVID brought a lot of ugly out of that. But I think what is
Mm-hmm.
encouraging, a lot of, younger people in the millennial generation, they want to learn more. Their quest for knowledge about these different topics, about these different racial issues, about these different, and like you said, the history about certain things is important. And this is something that we saw, especially with Black Lives Matter last year, also in
Mm-hmm.
the Stopping Asian Hate last year, things that like I had never heard about that were now coming to fruition. So it's it's things that, like I said, to tie a bow on it, it's not going to happen like in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It's something that's going to take a long time. But like you said, just encouraging people to educate themselves on these topics. That way, stuff like this, because like you said, I feel like it doesn't matter where you come from. If you're a first generation person, whether it's from Cuba, whether it's from Chile, whether it's from Mexico or Vietnam, it's pretty. I don't want to say it's exactly the same, but it's similar in the experiences that you're struggling with, especially people who have been here for generations and generations in the United States. So I think, if we were more unified, it definitely help the people, I guess you could say, in that demographic to kind of rise to power or different positions to where it's more equal and we can all have a slice of the pie,
Right. And it's just so crazy that, for example, Asians have been the first Asian Americans stepped foot in North America in the 1500s.
Mm-hmm.
Like Filipinos, they stepped foot in America, in North America. But we would say the big kind of influx of Asian Americans, mostly Chinese, were in the 1800s, and we built the goddamn Intercontinental Railroad,
Yeah.
right? We made that happen. There would be no West Coast, East Coast travel if not for that, with slaves building the East Side, and so we're talking about 100 some odd years, and people still think we're foreigners. There are Chinese people living in the South who've been here for like 8 generations, and they're still like, well, where are you from? Where are you really from?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to fight that, but it's really about constantly being vigilant, and it's exhausting, but that's why we have to do it together. So we need allies, right?
Mm-hmm.
The group that is disempowered is not going to be able to take over power. You need the people in power to land, and that happened in so many circumstances. And if we don't recognize that, we're not going to get as far as we want. But, whether it's the American Revolution, we're about democracy and stuff. I'm like, no, it only let white men with slaves and property vote.
Right.
You're talking about the civil rights movement. That happened because some rich white politicians were like, oh, other white politicians in the other, in Europe are pissed at us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's the only reason, and I'm not belittling the fight. I'm just saying that having allies is so crucial to ensuring that we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to put it on people who want to be allies, people who say allies, to do that work too, and to really be there, not to speak for us, but to help uplift us so that we can get through the door, so we can be in the room, so that we can have those opportunities to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be a long time, right?
Yeah.
200 years later, and we're still being asked, where are you from? So still got a long ways to go.
Okay. Now, fast tracking a little bit to your position now as a council member, what were some issues that you were really pushing for during your election that you've been able to maybe not necessarily get done right away, but you have made motions into getting them done in the near future?
Well, first, I had mentioned the Vietnamese community liaison.
Mm-hmm.
Basically cried on the dais a little bit, just okay, maybe I stopped myself, but I was just so I've been talking about that for a long time, and just me, like someone like my mom, she goes down to City Hall, and most likely there's nobody who can speak with her, and like how frustrating and how wrong that is, right? Try to call ourselves a diverse and inclusive and equitable city and not do that.
Mm-hmm.
And 30 years ago, Latinos didn't have that. Like, we didn't have Spanish documents at City Hall.
Yeah.
That blows our mind, right? And so for me, getting that line item on the budget was just very overwhelming and very exciting, even though I know it's still a long way. But the first step is kind of the hardest. So people recognize that there's really an issue and that they want to do something about it. Some of the other stuff that I've worked on is the hazard pay ordinance. That was kind of like the first big thing that I worked on. And it was controversial because some people are like, well, what about, city employees? What about people in medical sector and all this? Like, dude, if I got the money, I would give everybody a raise, I believe in having, higher pay for workers and worker protections and things like that. We have that in Europe. Why can't we get it here? But I don't have a magic wand. I don't have, the deepest pockets in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do have is data. And what we see is that grocery stores, corporations and companies were making record multi-billion-dollar profits
Mm-hmm.
during the freaking pandemic.
Yeah.
And, their workers are $8, $9, $10 an hour, sometimes $20 an hour if they're a manager, on the front lines, dealing with assholes who wouldn't wear a mask, who would yell at them, who would harass them, who would do all these horrible things. Like, dude, I signed up to freaking bag groceries, not like get attacked by a racist person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we saw that these grocery stores and other companies were paying this quote hero pay once the pandemic first hit, right? And then they just stopped. COVID got really bad, they still didn't bring it back. And so for me, the hazard pay ordinance wasn't really even about paying them going forward, but it's to like make up for the fact that these, employers didn't do it sooner.
Mm.
And it was a short period of time, it's 120 days, and it'll end June 30th. So that was kind of the first big thing I did, and just like still super proud and obviously jazzed about it. And super excited because I was speaking at a US history class at Los Amigos High School past week before, and one of the students came up in the Zoom camera, at the teacher's camera, and says, are you the one who's responsible for, why I get paid $14 an hour? I'm like, yes, yes, I am. And she was so grateful. And that's just, why we're here. So I was really excited. And then, of course, the other thing was really speaking up and out about stopping anti-Asian hate. Mm-hmm. And it was, and still is, so exhausting because it's a lot of emotional shit, like, crying and just being tired and having to show up and look like an emotional adult in front of people and get interviewed about why we're so pissed or angry or sad, and what to do about it. But I am very proud to be able to use my platform, this title, to talk about it, because I think a lot of people don't, and a lot of women, particularly, women of color, are just, and it was a time for us to be able to say something about it. And on top of that, be able to use this platform to fight for immigration reform. So, immigration is a federal issue, but there are a lot of things we can do on the state and local level to make immigration issues a little bit more equitable. So using my title to fight for the pardoning of Anh Thanh Nguyen, who is a Vietnamese refugee who is facing deportation. He came here as a teenager, and, got in with the wrong crowd and served his time in California prison for 20 years and was a really great inmate, paid his dues to society. And then instead of coming home to his family, he got paid twice.
Wow. Because
California is a sanctuary state, but guess what? The California prison system can still transfer people to ICE. Wow. And so, ask the governor to pardon Ann, which is the only way that he would not get deported, but two, also advocating for the passage of the Vision Act, which would prevent this type of transfer from happening again in the state of California. Of course, I'm working with advocacy groups like Viet Rise and OC Justice Fund and all of that, but really just to be able to use this title, this voice, this face, that people might even care about what I'm saying, to advocate and uplift these issues. So that's what I've been doing. Gonna keep working on it. There are a lot more issues: housing affordability, working on youth services that, figuring out ways to address public safety, but by investing in young people and art and parks. There's just so much more to do, but I have to kind of remind myself time. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, awesome. Well, as we wrap things up, I do have a few more questions for you, just to kind of get the audience to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
The first one I wanted to ask, what is something that you learned about yourself in the downtime that we had during 2020 when the pandemic hit?
Okay, first of all, the premise of the question is terrible because I did not have downtime.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
So here, one thing I learned about myself was that I am not, well, I guess I already knew it. I'm not a naturally anxious person. I became an anxious person during the campaigns.
Mm.
And I just want to share this because so often in politics, we kind of, not kind of, we dehumanize the, whether it's a candidate we don't like or don't agree with or the other party. But it was really hard. I was working basically full time. It's attorney part time, people full time. And I was the only one working in my family. My
Mm.
husband had just separated from the military honorably. He finished his commission. And the pandemic hit in the middle of
Wow.
the pandemic. My sister eventually graduated from optometry school in the middle of the pandemic. So she wasn't getting a job either. So, we're all living in this house and I have student loans. I graduated with $250,000 loans. So I had to make sure I was doing my job to pay for this house that we live in and pay my student loan debt and all this other stuff. It's not federal loans because and then also like campaigning.
Hmm.
First learning how to campaign, asking for money, and also, frankly, trying not to let this Vietnamese community down. Like I felt that pressure, and part of it is really me
Hmm.
putting it on myself. But I was the only Vietnamese person running in the quote Vietnamese ward.
Mm.
Like how horrible would it be if I lost? So I actually started journaling.
Mm.
Any moment where I would feel anxious or just overwhelmed, I would just start writing down exactly what I was feeling and why and what I can do about it. And that helped me. And that was really weird because I'd never done that before. But I found it really worked for me during the pandemic. And hopefully it'll help someone else who's listening.
Awesome. Yeah, I love hearing that. Now, if you could meet any three people, dead or alive, who would you want to speak with and conversate with the most?
Oh my gosh. I've never really thought about this question.
Okay.
So dead or alive. Um, so I'm a Hillary Clinton apologist.
Hmm.
True. I
Okay.
admit it. So I want to meet her because I feel like whether you like her or not, or the policies or whatever, she was the first like female sort of political figure I'd ever remembered.
Hmm.
Because I remember the Monica and Bill scandal,
Hmm.
Monica Lewinsky and stuff. And Hillary, just in my mind, kind of exists in the space of an incredibly smart woman lawyer, right? Woman lawyer who got married, who has a husband who had all these dreams and she was supporting him, but she was like fighting against this kind of patriarchal norm. Like she used to be Hillary Rodham when
Hmm.
she married. She never changed her last name until he lost. Sorry, not he lost, but like during his campaign for Arkansas governor, she changed her name because people were
Mm.
expecting it
Wow.
in the South. And so just kind of the place been and the things that she's seen or done in politics in the State Department with foreign countries and frankly also being the wife of a man who cheated on her so publicly so many times.
Hmm.
I just find like there's just so many questions, but I don't know if she would ever answer them. But just to be able to talk about some of that and how she dealt with it, because us local government folks, it's like so minor compared to being on the screen and like Benghazi emails and everything about your life is kind of picked apart. So I would love to kind of meet her. I would say, if, well, I'd like to do a fictional character.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I would be really interested in meeting, the characters of Harry Potter. I'm
Mm.
a millennial. I know that J.K. Rowling is a turf and we don't like her, but her stories are great. And as a millennial, it's just so like the audiobooks got me through the 2016
Mm.
election. Like I remember because I had flown to Vegas, my husband was stationed in Vegas at the time, and I was like, "We're gonna watch the election together, the results, and all this." And she lost. So I went to bed early. I couldn't watch anymore. And the next morning, I almost didn't show up to work. Like
Mhm.
I almost was like, I'm going to skip my flight, not come. Um, but I decided to go to work because I reminded myself American slaves, Black slaves got up every day and worked hard during Jim Crow, during the Civil Rights era. I can do this
Mhm.
if they can do this. And So that got me to work, but really just being so upset, listening to the Harry Potter books really helped me get through it because in my
Mm.
mind, at the end of the day, I did defeat Voldemort and Trump was my Voldemort anyhow. That was,
That's
that was
awesome.
my, so it got me through. But, the characters, they're just friends.
Hmm.
Um, People who seemingly normal or someone like Harry who wanted to be a normal kid and who had this great responsibility to do the right thing, even when every adult person in his life telling him that he's wrong or that
Hmm.
he's being used or any of these other things. So um, that would just be, a little
Okay,
childhood dream come true.
awesome. All right, two more easier questions. If you could have any topping on a pizza, what would it be?
Oh no, just one.
No,
Wait,
no,
this
any
isn't complete.
toppings. You could have
Oh,
multiple. Yeah,
oh, any toppings. Okay, well, popular opinion, but it has to have pineapple. Love pineapple on pizza. Anybody who says otherwise is wrong because
yeah.
pineapple is slightly sour and sweet and it cuts through the fat. That's really what you need to have the balance. Okay.
Okay.
Um, and I like cheese, mushroom, Italian sausage, ham,
Mm.
and olives with onion. I
Okay.
think that's my order.
All right.
Yes.
Awesome. If you could be reincarnated to any animal, what would it be?
So if I'm being honest, okay, my not honest answer is some type of bird
Okay.
that flies. Like maybe like a bald eagle. It's like,
Okay.
they're protected now, no one can kill them, and they're like really they kill other things.
Right.
Super cool. But if I'm really being honest, I'd probably be reincarnated into a house cat
Mm.
because they get to sleep all day. They're pampered. They don't need to put it with people loving them. They just love when they want.
Hmm.
It's perfect.
Awesome. Okay, then last question. If you could give any advice to your younger self, what would it be?
This is something that I actually discovered this past year.
Hmm.
And my piece of advice is give zero fucks.
Mm.
Not in the things that you do. You should care very much about the things you do, but give zero fucks about putting aside your feelings so that other people would feel comfortable. Give zero fucks about looking bad or looking wrong or saying the wrong things because at the end of the day, being genuine to yourself and to the community and your family is, in my opinion, the most important thing. I try to live my life as honestly as I can, and um, it can be really hard, especially politics. Because everything you say, someone can take it the wrong way, or someone can say, well, she's this or that.
Hmm.
Um, but also in politics, you're just like, well, I maybe want to offend somebody because they might donate, or they might support me, or they might endorse me, or they might vote for me. But I one time during a rally, a Stop Asian Hate rally, in
Hmm.
which this white dude, conservative mayor Fullerton, came up and started talking about how we shouldn't hate Asians because they do so well in school and that's why people don't like them. Like total model minority myth bullshit.
Yeah.
And I was like so close to going up there to just be like, this guy is wrong. He's saying racist. This is not what we're here, blah, blah. But the organizer is like, we're not rebut him, let him look stupid. We're just going to move along.
Hmm.
And in respect for that organizer, I didn't go up there and do this thing.
Hmm.
And then I was pissed for like 4 days. And I'm still pissed because at the end of the day, I prioritize the organizer's comfort. I prioritize the press's comfort and the speaker's comfort over the truth and
Hmm.
over my own truth and my comfort and the truth and comfort of all the Asian women who were there.
Hmm.
So that's what I would say, because at the end of the day, you live with it, you have to live with yourself.
Hmm.
And if all you do is regret or feel like you should have said something, that's going to be so much harder than saying, well, I said it. Now I know next time not to.
Okay. Well, thank you again so much for being a part of the show. Before you go ahead and promote anything that you'd like to promote, whether it's a website or something that maybe in the election this year or whatever you need to promote.
Well, luckily, I don't have to run for re-election until 2024.
Okay.
But I do, ask that folks listening check out my Instagram page. It's Thai Viet Fan. Facebook is Thai Viet Fan 2020, or Twitter Thai V Fan. My Twitter is not very involved in Santa Ana stuff. It's really more my commentary state and federal stuff. So
Mm.
if that's what you're looking for, it's probably a little bit more fun, but I have to be more careful with it because you can't edit on Twitter.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you again.